We often think about Abraham Lincoln as a marble man, this man sitting in a temple in Washington, D.C., larger than life. But during this period of the war, he was highly unpopular. I've put on the screen here 4 different images of ballots from the Civil War era. These are all from the election of 1864. And if you look at them, you'll notice that they're a little bit different from ballots today. Today, if you vote, you go to the election polling place and you get a ballot that's been provided by the local government. It's usually printed by the government or at least contracted by the government. The ballots in the 19th century were very different. They were actually printed by the political parties themselves. And so if you look at these ballots, you'll notice that they don't list the candidates from all of the parties. They only list the candidates of the party for which they are being cast. So on the left-hand side, you have a ballot from Michigan. Notice it says for the Union at the top. It has Lincoln and Johnson. They are the Republican candidates for president. No compromise with treason. This is a message, a political message that is actually printed on the ballot. And beneath that message, it says, "Rally round the flag, boys, rally once again." That was a song that people sang in the 19th century during the Civil War when it came to mustering up men to go fight. The next ballot is from Ohio, and this one features the Democratic candidate for president, George B. McClellan. We'll talk about McClellan in a couple of minutes. McClellan was a very popular Union Army general during the Civil War, and he runs for president, and the party actually puts his picture on the ballot. Next to that, you have another Ohio ballot. This one is for Lincoln and Johnson again. And then you'll notice the 4th ballot is actually printed in German. And the way that this worked was when you went to vote in an election in the 1860s, you would actually go to the people who worked for your political party, your party operatives, and you would get a ballot from them, not from a local government official. And so you would get the ballot and then you would go cast it. Now, you'll notice that the ballots have different symbols on them and are different colors. You might find pink or blue or red ballots in the 19th century. And when you went through the polling place, what that meant was everyone knew exactly who you were voting for. There's no secrecy in the election of 1864. And that meant that it gave rise to voter intimidation and even violence at the polls. Imagine if you are a Democrat in a highly Republican area or vice versa, and people see you walking through the polling place. They very well might intimidate you or try to keep you from voting, sometimes even violently. I'll show you one other ballot here. This one on the left is another presidential ticket for Abraham Lincoln. Again, you can see the very bright colors and the patriotic symbols, the American flags, and the Liberty caps. And the important thing that I want you to get out of seeing these ballots is that there's no secrecy. Today, we have what's called the Australian ballot or the secret ballot. And so when you go to vote, it's your business. It's not anyone else's business in terms of who you're voting for. In the 19th century, there was no secret ballot. These ballots are still very highly collectible today. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a whole collection. This was about 270 ballots that sold at auction in 2013 for over $8,000. So these things are very highly collectible. And one other thing I'll point out about the ballots, you'll notice on some of the ballots, there's the down ticket offices, voting for coroner or governor or state auditor, those kind of positions. If you didn't want to vote the straight party ticket, what you would do is scratch the name off of the ballot and just take a pen and cross it out. And that way you wouldn't vote for all of the offices. So with that as background, let me take you back to the beginning of the election of 1864. Abraham Lincoln was the incumbent president. And, as popular as he is today, it's hard for us to realize that he was highly unpopular at different periods of the Civil War. And this is a wonderful cartoon from the spring of 1864 that shows Lincoln asleep in his bed. And you've got all these Republican operatives in the foreground. And you can see that they're measuring his shoes. They're trying to figure out, can we get a better Republican to replace Lincoln with? Can we kick him off the ballot, not have him be our candidate this year, and fill his shoes with someone else? These are all radical Republicans. These are Republicans who, in our parlance today, we would say are running to the left of Lincoln, and they want to find someone who's going to be even more progressive than Lincoln himself. Well, the Republican convention met in June of 1864 in Baltimore, and they decided not to go with a more radical candidate. They put Lincoln on the ticket as the incumbent, as the candidate for president in 1864, but they dumped his vice president. Lincoln had Hannibal Hamlin of Maine as his vice president during his first term. In his second term, he would run with Andrew Johnson. And the Republicans were trying to have sort of a broad appeal here. Lincoln is a Republican. He's a moderate one, but he's still an anti-slavery president. So they brought in Andrew Johnson as his new vice presidential candidate. Hannibal Hamlin, the current vice president, was from Maine. He was seen as more of an abolitionist. And what the Republicans hoped was by bringing Andrew Johnson onto the ticket, who was a former Democrat from Tennessee, that maybe that would broaden the appeal of the party and bring in Democrats to vote for Lincoln. The other thing that the Republicans did that year was they rebranded themselves. They called themselves the Union Party, and you can actually see that at the bottom of this slide, the Grand National Union banner for 1864. Again, if you're a Democrat, you might not want to vote for a Republican or vice versa. But if they call themselves the Union ticket and you're in the middle of the Civil War, you might be willing to cast a ballot for Abraham Lincoln running as a Union candidate rather than as a Republican. The war itself is very important to understanding the context of the presidential election of 1864. General U.S. Grant for the Union side and Robert E. Lee for the Confederate side were duking it out in Virginia in what's known as the Overland Campaign, and they're fighting near the area that's today Fredericksburg. And they're fighting it out in the spring and summer of 1864. During a period of about a month, Ulysses S. Grant suffers about 60,000 casualties. I mean, this is just an unbelievably bloody period of the war. Eventually, they find themselves south of the city of Petersburg. And you can see that here on this map at the number 5. They've worked their way down from Fredericksburg to Petersburg. Again, Grant loses about 60,000 men. And then Grant lays siege around Petersburg, and Robert E. Lee digs in his heels there, desperately trying to stop Grant from capturing Richmond. Now, this fighting just caused the morale in the North to plummet. Northerners see all these casualties. Everyone in the North is related to a soldier and knows someone who's been killed or wounded in this fighting. And it causes them to lose faith in Lincoln and to begin to question whether this war is really worth it. And this image here shows you just the gruesomeness of the fighting that's going on. And this is a burial detail here. You can see an African-American man in the foreground, and they're burying the bodies not only of the men who have been killed in the spring and summer of 1864, but also on those very same sites in previous years. And, you know, again, we often think about Abraham Lincoln as a marble man, this man sitting in a temple in Washington, D.C., larger than life. But during this period of the war, he was highly unpopular. And these are some anti-Lincoln cartoons from 1864 that give a sense of the unpopularity that Lincoln was experiencing at the time. On the left, you can see a goddess representing Columbia, and she's trying to restrain Lincoln as he's holding a dagger that says Yankee Liberty. On the right, you have Lincoln trampling on the Constitution, and he's looking like a dunce there. And he's, stepping on the Constitution, destroying constitutional rights. Meanwhile, in the background, you have a casualty next to a barrel of gunpowder. Here's an image of Lincoln who's like a phoenix rising from the ashes of things that are sacred to Americans: the US Constitution, free press, commerce, states' rights, habeas corpus, public credit. Lincoln is destroying things for his own power. Here's another anti-Lincoln cartoon from this period, where again, it has the goddess Columbia demanding that Lincoln give back all of these dead from Union armies from the battlefield. And it depicts Lincoln as a dunce. This cartoonist has Lincoln saying, well, the fact is, by the way, that reminds me of a story. And that was kind of typical Lincoln. If you went to talk to him, he would say, that reminds me of a story. And this cartoonist wants to capture that Lincoln just isn't taking the suffering and the carnage seriously the way he should be. By August of 1864, Lincoln was absolutely convinced that he would lose re-election. And on August 23rd, he took out a piece of paper in the White House and he wrote out this little note, which is now known as the blind memorandum. And you can see Lincoln's very handwriting here. And it says this: This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be reelected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect as to save the Union between the election and the inauguration, as he will have secured his election on such ground that he cannot possibly save it afterwards. Lincoln then took this note and folded it up and sealed it and had his cabinet members sign it. And you can see their signatures on the side there. So what is Lincoln saying? He's saying, I know I'm going to lose the presidential election. I know that whoever beats me, he doesn't yet know it's going to be George McClellan. The Democrats haven't met yet, but whoever beats me is going to do it on terms that is going to make it impossible for him to save the Union. And so Lincoln was committing himself to working with his political opponent, the president-elect, to save the Union between when Lincoln loses the election and when the next president is inaugurated, because he was convinced that a Democrat couldn't possibly save the Union after the inauguration. And in having his cabinet sign this, he was essentially having his cabinet say, yes, we're going to work with you. They didn't know what they were signing, but Lincoln wanted them to agree to these terms.